So HDR gaming has been around for a few years now, and I've had my fair share of playing games in that format, respectively, on my PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X. Now, for those of you who haven't experienced HDR, I want to start off this video just by saying it's incredibly difficult to explain what HDR is and really talk about the benefits, because it's one of those things where you really have to see it to believe it. It's a format that more or less takes lighting and tries to realistically display it on a wide range of different brightness variants. So we're talking about, like, if you look up at the sun, you realize that the sun is the brightest source, and it's a lot brighter than a simple light bulb, that you can see. And so what HDR does is it takes the information of the light bulb, tones down the brightness of that light bulb, and then brightens up the sun, and you get this wide range of brightness that really adds to the shots. In addition to that, it also has a lot to do with the darkness in scenes and how light plays off of the darkness. And also, on top of that, color, where you get a boost in colors, you get a wide range of colors. Colors can appear more saturated than normal and still remain accurate. And so HDR is really just about getting us closer to that real life image. Again, for those of you who haven't experienced HDR, you really do have to see it to believe it. We're sort of in a weird point right now with HDR where we still have a battle going on between HDR10, which is a software solution, versus Dolby Vision, which is a hardware chip that's installed on a few higher end television sets. Most games to this day support HDR10. I believe there's only a handful that actually support Dolby Vision, and Microsoft has been extremely good with updating the Xbox One in particular to support these formats. So, Xbox One X supports Dolby Vision on top of HDR10. It's the only console that does that. And then they also have FreeSync support, which is entirely different, but it just goes to show, Microsoft's doing a really good job at really supporting the different variants of technology out there. But that's not what this video is about. I don't want it to necessarily be about, hey, this is HDR, go get an HDR TV. What I want to talk about is something interesting, something that I didn't expect HDR to really do for me, and that is it's bringing me back to console gaming. In fact, it's getting to the point where I actually prefer now to get games on my Xbox One or PS4 to play it simply in HDR, even though, there might be a reduction in the performance. Maybe it's 30 frames versus 60 frames per second on my PC, and maybe the game runs at a lower resolution than what I could probably run it on my PC. But it has HDR support. Not saying that PC games don't support HDR, they do. In fact, we're looking at Shadow Warrior 2 right here, and this game was, I believe, the first game ever on PC to support HDR, but I don't have an HDR monitor. I have an HDR TV, and the PlayStation 4 Pro, the Xbox One X are connected to it, and it's in a different house, than basically my PC is. And my PC is connected to a 27-inch 4K monitor. So with that being said, I can't simply connect my PC to my TV and enjoy HDR games through that. On top of that, I wouldn't really want to do that. I have a desktop. I would have to unconnect everything and then bring it, somewhere else and then connect it all up. It's just not convenient, but for HDR, my God, I've been playing a few games recently, and in particular, what really kind of inspired this video was me playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider along with Rise of the Tomb Raider before it. So I replayed Rise of the Tomb Raider on the Xbox One X as it was recently upgraded on that console to support a wide variety of different options. So you got like a high resolution option, you got a high graphical option they call basically enriched visuals, I believe, and then they also have a native 4K option. So on top of that, it also got support for Dolby Atmos. Again, the Xbox One X is the only console that supports Dolby Atmos, and on top of that, it is also the only version of the game, I believe. I don't even think the PlayStation 4 Pro and the PC versions of Rise of the Tomb Raider has support for HDR. And so I booted the game up to play it for, to be honest, the third time at this point, because I wanted to replay all the Tomb Raider games before I jumped to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And I did. Rise of the Tomb Raider was, the last game of the rebooted trilogy I needed to replay. And I thought no better way to jump into the game than play it on the Xbox One X. And I mean, my God, I was completely blown away by what was just displayed on my screen. And it wasn't so much the graphics, because I got to play the game. I have the game also on my PC. And, you know, if you remember back in the day, I streamed the game first on Xbox One, the normal Xbox One console. And then I got the game on PC, because by the time I was playing it on the Xbox One, it was already coming out like a few weeks later on the PC. And so I decided to, you know, basically get the game on PC and play it through first on that platform. So I was already used to basically the high fidelity graphics. I believe I played it at a native 4K resolution at very high to ultra settings. I was really close, and I remember the game didn't actually run that well. I had a lot of optimization issues at launch. It's an extremely hard game to run completely maxed out. But, you know, the reason I'm saying that is because I was used to already the visuals. I already knew it was a pretty game. I saw it at its best at the time. And so jumping onto the Xbox One X, it wasn't the visuals that so much astounded me in terms of the texture quality and the different effects going on. It was the HDR implementation. And that game didn't launch with HDR. Keep that in mind. You know, it was simply added later on, because at the time, you know, HDR on consoles wasn't even supported when that game came out. And even when the game was patched to support HDR, I mean, it was one of the most beautiful presentations I've ever seen on a display for a game in quite some time. And it was like the incredible, you know, highlights in the game where you had like these bright lights shining into the camera, and how it just like overtook the entire image, and it just looked amazing. It was also the color accuracy on top of that, really vibrant reds, you know, really deep colors and whatnot. And keep this in mind, you know, I'm not playing here on an OLED or QLED TV that's like, you know, $2,000 to $3,000, and I have all the bells and whistles attached. You know, the TV that I'm playing my games on is a 60-inch Samsung JU7100. All right, it's a 2015 Samsung TV, and it was simply updated in its software patch to support HDR10. And so that TV only gets around 400 to 500 nits of peak brightness, all right? And it doesn't have a wide color gamut on top of that. It is a 10-bit panel, but it isn't able to really saturate the colors like a quantum dot display can. In fact, I think the higher end model was the JS8500, I believe, from 2015. So it's just, I mean, my God, you know, the fact that I was getting an image that blew me away on a, you know, kind of mid-range TV for the time that was simply updated to support the HDR format doesn't really do a true HDR image. Because with true HDR, you need a TV that's going to display at least 1,000 nits. You need a TV that's able to have a wide color gamut. And on top of that, another big important feature I didn't mention was local dimming. Local dimming is essentially the technology that allows the TV to dim certain parts of the screen. So for darker areas, it will dim that versus the lighter areas, and it really is supposed to be used in tandem with HDR. My TV supports the format. The problem is that it doesn't support the format well. In fact, it only dims around, I believe, 40 or 50% of the screen at a time. So it's really not even that worth using, quite honestly. But I still turn it on, you know, because I still want the effect, and it's still recommended to display in HDR. But again, the reason I'm saying all this is because the game was still impressive to look at, and it was such a night and day difference from what I normally saw playing the game on a, you know, standard dynamic range monitor, or just, you know, when I originally played the game on the Xbox One without the format update. I mean, it was just an absolute beauty. And right now I'm playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and again, I'm blown away by just the beautiful jungle vistas in that game, how light really plays off of it in this really intense and really satisfying way, how you can see these different variants of light and how it changes the mood of the game. There's a few videos I uploaded on Twitter of just off-screen gameplay, and you can even see what I'm talking about in there, how, you know, different parts of like the water change colors depending on the different lighting source. And this isn't stuff that is necessarily hidden in standard dynamic range. It's just that it's amplified to a really great effect in high dynamic range. And really, it's something I can't get on my PC. You know, when I see my PC right now, and I've spent, you know, thousands of dollars on building this PC, and I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to build a system of this magnitude, and it has still kept me going, you know, throughout. Even though the graphics cards, the 980 Ti's and SLI is barely supported these days, it is still able to handle pretty much most games at basically max settings. For example, Shadow Warrior 2 here, I just recently completed this game, was playing it at 4K native resolution with all settings maxed, although this is a game developer that actually supports all the bells and whistles of NVIDIA's technology. But, you know, I mean, I really love the experience on my PC and what it can really do when games are optimized correctly to take advantage of really all the power I put in there. You know, but when it comes to the HDR effect, I simply just don't have access to that. HDR monitors are expensive because they're fairly new technology. You know, these days we've had it in TVs for, you know, a few years now, but monitors are still, you know, just starting to really have them. And so you're spending, you know, you're to really get a true HDR monitor, you're looking around the, you know, $1,000 price range. And at that point, you can get, you know, you can get a pretty, you know, decent, you know, upper mid to lower high end 4K TV that can display HDR, if not, you know, exactly as properly with all the supported features, but close to it. You know, it's like you might as well just get a TV at that point. So, I mean, I have to say, you know, and it's not just Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I think another example as well, one that really comes to mind is Ratchet and Clank, the reboot. You know, now I was not expecting to enjoy that game as much as I actually ended up being, but on top of that, I played the game in HDR because by the time I got to play it, it was actually updated to support the format. Again, similar to like Rise of the Tomb Raider. And when you saw the difference between standard dynamic range and HDR in that game, it was so drastic that it literally changed up the way that you looked at the levels. And it really utilized color. Like that game in particular utilized color to a great degree. You saw, you know, like you didn't see like reds bleed into like oranges. It was like everything was just correct. And I remember when I played that game for the first time on an HDR display, I mean, you don't know what you're missing again until you really see the effect. When it's utilized properly and when game developers really spend the time to really put in the effort, it can look amazing. And then there are other times where HDR just kind of, you know, can, it looks, you get some nice little, you know, crisper highlights and whatnot, but it doesn't look dramatically different from what you're getting in standard dynamic range, you know, but, you know, there are certain games that really take advantage of it, and to be honest with you guys, it's causing me to rethink the way I purchase my games or where I play them, because I'm wondering, you know, should I get the Xbox One X version? Should I get the PS4 Pro version? And should I get it to simply play the game in HDR? Maybe case in point is a Hitman 2 coming out. I really don't know if I'm going to get that game on my PC. Normally, without HDR as an effect, I would just get the game on PC because I played, you know, the Hitman episodic series on PC, so it makes sense for me to get Hitman 2 on PC. But now, you know, Hitman 2 supports native 4K and supports HDR on the Xbox One X. And so I'm seriously considering just getting Hitman 2 on Xbox One X just for the fact that it supports HDR on that console. And, you know, that's a decision I'm going to have to make at some point when that game comes out. But, you know, I really guess I'm curious to see whether you guys who have experienced HDR, and you know, if you're in a similar situation with me where you don't have a PC connected to your HDR display, is it really or maybe you have a particular PS4, you know, Pro or Xbox One X, and I'm wondering if if HDR is dramatic enough for those of you who have experienced it to you know, make it so that you would play games on that specific hardware that would support it. You know, it's really interesting because everyone's going to have a different HDR experience. HDR is one of those things where it can look, you know, really dull on a cheap TV, but then really amazing on a really high-end TV. So it really matters how well the developers support it for games. And on top of that, it matters how well your display is. Keep in mind, my display is, you know, it's nothing special when it comes to HDR. It's a 10-bit panel, so that's good. But again, 10-bit doesn't mean it supports a wide color gamut. The colors aren't able to get super vibrant like they do on a quantum dot. On top of that, you know, it only gets around half of the peak brightness that HDR is pretty much recommended and created to display. You're supposed to have a minimum of 1000 nits of brightness to really experience the real true effect of HDR. You know, you're supposed to have really good local dimming so your TV can display the dark scenes properly and the light scenes at the same time. You know, but it's the way I really measure how well a game supports HDR is if it can blow me away on a mid-range set like I'm playing on now, then it must just look incredible, absolutely stellar on a higher end set. So yeah, it's really quite interesting. I didn't think that HDR was going to be such a dramatic thing for me that I would actually prefer to play the game. Like, I'd rather play the game at 30 frames per second and on my console to simply have HDR support rather than play it on 60 frames per second at pretty much near 4K max settings, whatever, here on my beast PC. You know, it's quite interesting how the tides have turned in that respect, and it's going to be really interesting going into next generation. You know, we have about two, in my opinion, next generation is going to start around the year 2020, so I'm expecting, you know, the year after next, we're going to have the new PlayStation 5 and then Xbox. But like, those games are going to have like, or those consoles rather, are going to have like the higher bandwidth HDMI support, so we're going to be able to get better HDR experiences with our games on top of that for higher support resolutions and whatnot. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it tackles next generation, and whether or not, you know, TVs are going to advance, you know, with display technology and the way they handle HDR. Like I said, there's a war currently going on between HDR10 and Dolby Vision. A lot of people expect HDR10 to come out on top simply because it's software based instead of hardware based. But, you know, again, Dolby Vision is a superior format, but it requires a TV that supports it and a game console on top of that that supports that format. It's not something that can just be patched in like HDR10 can. So it's going to be quite interesting. I know some people are currently waiting for there to be like one specific designated format for HDR before they jump on board. But for the games that have supported the format now, I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed. I just cannot I cannot describe to you guys like the beauty of playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider or Rise of the Tomb Raider. You know, regardless of what you think about those games, the effects on HDR for those in particular are just really blowing me away. And I have yet to play games like God of War. I have yet to play games like Spider-Man, right? So I know that, you know, even those games support HDR, and I've heard they support it very well. It's just exciting. You know, it's like I look forward to really seeing this extra layer, you know, added to the game world, and it really adds a lot to the atmosphere of the game on top of that. Like I said, there's some games where it just looks dramatically different. So yeah, I wanted to gauge your guys' thoughts on that. Let me know what you all think. And if you guys have a particular favorite HDR-enabled game or film, again, I'm lucky enough to own an Xbox One X, so I get 4K Blu-rays on top of that, and I'm currently building a collection. I do actually want to do a full-on video of my 4K Blu-ray collection. I think that'll be absolutely fun to actually kind of go through. So yeah, I'm all on top of this, guys. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. Have an awesome week, and I'll see you in the next one.